So that, you know, I think there's an awful tendency with a lot of libertarians to think that we can't go out there and recruit high-profile people who could, in fact, run for office in '82 and get elected. I believe it's really important that we do elect some people in 1982, and if we have to go out and recruit, you know, expand our ranks, recruit people to do it, we ought to do it. Obviously, people who have been running for office up to now are getting experience, they're getting coverage, they're getting a higher profile themselves, and many of those people probably could run for a lower office and get elected. Maybe some of them have got enough exposure where they could run for the same office with some chance of getting elected. But I think we've got to get really serious and really professional about finding candidates that can win and then putting the resources behind them. In addition to running your paper candidates, you know, candidates, maybe that's not a really good term, but candidates who know they're not going to win, that you ought to have, if humanly possible, and maybe it's not possible in this area at this time, I just don't know that much about the circumstances here, but if it's humanly possible to pick out a candidate in a race that he or she can win, then I think you ought to concentrate an awful lot of your resources, money, time, talent, manpower, on that race, and do what you can to win. There's nothing better than a winner. You know, you get somebody in office, and the press pays attention to you then. You've got a forum. And one person in New York in public office, particularly a partisan public office, would do you more good probably than, you know, several hundred you out beating the bushes without that. And yeah, anything that gives you a forum. Anything that gives you a forum. Yes, sir.
Yes, Dick. We've been talking a lot amongst the Syracuse group about moving out and how to do it. The National Committee and the SIL group have published a number of these wonderful pamphlets. I think there's 50 or so now. May I entertain that for the good of our training and moving out, that you, through SIL or National, compile your press releases, the bills you've introduced in the legislature, in a training manual sort of a thing that could be printed and distributed to the various libertarian groups throughout the country. I think that's all we have to see, is that one man has done this in 4 years, and that we actually can read it, see it, well, do now. And I think it would be a phenomenal piece of information to utilize in moving this thing out.
Is that agreeable? Okay, I've been asked to do something similar to that several times, and frankly, just haven't had the time, but I think working with the national headquarters or somehow we'll get it done. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes?
Would you talk about how to finance campaigns?
Okay, you were supposed to remind me and I didn't answer, and I didn't repeat the questions. The question is, how do you finance campaigns? Well, again, I don't. Can you run raffles in this state? Can political parties run raffles in New York? We can in Alaska, and we use it very effectively. If you can't do it, then I will skip that. But other than that, other than running raffles, do we think we can or can't?
No, you cannot.
Cannot.
The state is the only entity that can run raffles.
Yeah.
They call it lottery.
Yeah, why? That makes sense. We raffle off 3 airplanes, and we get we make about $15,000 or $20,000 each one. The tickets literally sell themselves. We move the airplane down onto a lot right downtown, and put a big sign on it, and say buy your ticket inside. And they're $100 tickets, and we sell enough of them to double our money. So if we raffle off a $15,000 airplane, we usually start at about the 1st of May and have the drawing in August, and the tickets have always all been sold during that period of time. That gives us we also, I don't know how you do it in New York, but we've just on membership, we charge $25 for a membership. That takes care of national, state, and local dues, and that's $10 to the state organization, $7 to the local organization, and we send 8 on the national. I don't know whether you're charging local dues around or not, and it's just pen money anyway. But it if you got several hundred members, it helps. The only way to really raise money successful for a campaign that I've ever found is to go out eyeball to eyeball. Put together your fundraising committee and do it kind of in a professional way again. What I do is get my crew together that's going to help do that, and we've now got a really good list of people who have contributed in the past and that sort of thing. We just put down all the people who want to contribute, that we want to hit up for a contribution. We figure how much they ought to be able to give this year. Then we figure out who the best person to go talk to them is, and give them a deadline to go out and do it. We set some goals on how much money we're trying to raise, and just go out and do it. I think it's another thing. I guess a technique on an improvision on that would be to have a cause. You know, if you get a campaign, that's one thing, but you need money for other than campaigns. And so right now, for instance, we got 2 committees set up in Alaska, one in Anchorage and one in Fairbanks, called the Committee to Nominate Randolph for Governor. And they're totally separate legally from me. I'm not even supposed to know they're happening, actually. I talk to them all the time. We've started an outreach program where I've got a paid column now in the 2 biggest papers in the state. And I've got a sponsored radio program in 3 communities in the state. And these are all being done. We just got them started in the last 30 days. But they're all being sponsored by people. The one column in Fairbanks costs $150, and the one in Anchorage costs $200. And I think the radio program in Anchorage is about $200 a week to put it on the program, just a minute program, on 4 stations once a week each. But that's all being done by people going out and saying to potential sponsors again, hey, you want to help Randolph put this, sponsor this ad. And we have a specific thing for them to do, and we have a specific amount of money that we need to do it. And I think having a specific cause for whatever you happen to want the money for, and if it's a good enough cause, you can find people who will give to it. If you just want money to put in the general treasury and use for whatever, to buy Randolph an airplane ticket, people might say that isn't too hot a deal, and not contribute. But that's really about it. There's really no secret. Just like the slogan, there ain't nothing to it but to do it. And getting started is 75% of any job. And raising money is no different, and it just takes people to go out and do it. A lot of people are very self-conscious about asking for money. You always have to find people who aren't self-conscious about asking for money, who aren't bashful about it at all. And I used to be a little bit bashful about it until I ran for office the first time and spent most of my money getting elected. And after I'd been there 2 years, I said, if anybody wants me to go back down there, they're going to have to pay the bill. And that's been my attitude ever since. And I am not embarrassed at all to go out and ask somebody for $1,000 because that's a heck of a lot less than I'm putting into it. Yes.
Dick, how do you feel about the often-made allegation that elected libertarians will eventually lose their commitment to libertarian principles and become pragmatic in order to achieve either party power or personal gain?
I suppose we're just human like anybody else, and there'll be people like that, and there'll be people that aren't like that. I think we've got to really strive hard to prevent that from happening, of course. But I don't think there's any question at all that there's going to be exceptions to the rule, and there's going to be people. I hope the rule is that we don't. But I'm sure there'll be exceptions to that. I think the movement in the party now for this ideological purity, I'm sure you're all somewhat aware of, Murray Rothbard and Dave Nolan, etc., are heading up. What I understand about that, and I have no personal contact at all, but I think that's going a bit far and really exaggerating any necessary response that might be required to what they think is inappropriate things that happened in the Clark campaign. I think the Clark campaign was basically a well-run campaign, pretty hardcore libertarianism, and I think it did us a world of good. And I think people who ran it ought to be given credit, not blame. So I think that's an over-exaggeration of the situation. I understand their concern, and I agree with it. I think that it's really significant. I don't want to be involved. If we become co-opted to the extent that there's nothing left, I won't be here. The only reason I'm here at all is because I think that we are a really fresh, new, and I think viable alternative to the bankruptcy of the other 2 parties. And we can only remain that way so long as we do stay very close to our principles. A lot of people think that there's a real dichotomy between running and getting elected and being effective and sticking to your principles. And I think just the opposite is true. The more you stick to those principles, the more effective you're going to be, the more successful you're going to be, and the more effective you're going to be. And I think most politicians will, once they get in a position where they have to function, if they're there in the first place, will realize that. The only reason I did as well in the campaign this year as I did is that I did stick to my guns. And I had lots of people tell me that they didn't agree with me on everything, but they very much believed that I was doing what I thought was right, and I'd tell them exactly what I was thinking, not what I thought they wanted to hear. And I went to a moral majority meeting. It had moral majority people from this part of the world. I went there, I gave my little 3-minute speech, and the preacher that was running the thing put his hand up, and he said, Mr. Randolph, I understand you introduced a bill to legalize prostitution. And I said, yes, sir, I did. And I also introduced a bill to legalize gambling and narcotics, too. had a really good give and take for about 5 more minutes with the audience, and they didn't agree with me by and large. But I think there was a great deal of admiration and understanding for the way that I handled the problem. And I went ahead then and put an ad, a radio ad, on a Christian station there that dealt with that whole problem. And the ad started off something like Christian values and libertarian beliefs are totally compatible. They both require a free will and personal responsibility, and went on with more detail. But it was an almost irrefutable quotation on this comparison between, or lack of comparison, most people think, between libertarian thought and Christian libertarian thought. I was in Kenai one day recruiting people. We had a meeting come up that night and had a lunch that afternoon. And one guy had been trying to get to join the party is a really basic fundamentalist Christian. And he's very much a libertarian too, but he just couldn't quite bring himself to tie the two things together. He understood it intellectually, but emotionally he was just all tied up with it. And so I was at his radio station and tried to, he runs a radio station, I was just doing an hour-long talk show thing, and then he was coming down to lunch. And we had a little conversation at the radio station. I asked him to join. He said, no, he still had a problem. So at lunch he was there, and he brought this thing up again. And most of the people there were pretty fundamentalist Christian people. And John says, Dick, he said, I agree with everything you say. I just like to do it, but I just can't get over this hurdle of correlating libertarianism and victim stands with Christianity. And I looked at him and I said, John, I don't mean to be cute about this or sacrilegious or unrespectful or anything like that, but I really think that God is a libertarian. And it kind of took them all by surprise, and I wanted to say why I thought God was libertarian. As I understand the Christian ethic, it is very libertarian. And he agreed, he joined. And about 3 other people joined, and that night we had a revival meeting, and 18 other people joined. And it was really quite rewarding. There's another hand over here. Yeah.
I'd rather know what your answer is going to be. How about endorsements? Do you see much sense of libertarians endorsing Republicans or Democrats when they
No.
feel okay?
Why? Just give them credibility. I think anything we do, you've got a very malignant situation out there. They're going the wrong direction. They're doing bad things. They're not part of the solution. They're part of the problem. And if we give them any credibility at all, we're hurting our cause.
How successful would the repeal of the state tax have been if Alaska's financial position wasn't so sound?
Probably not nearly as successful.
Yeah. Well, what do the rest of us do?
Just got a tougher job.
Drill for oil.
Yeah, come on and get your share. Yes, sir.
Did the government of the state of Alaska wind up cutting back on anything as a result of repealing the income tax?
No, of course they did not.
They're still providing the same services,
Yeah.
giveaways, and whatever.
No. It's going to require well, 2 things will be kind of funny. If we end up electing a libertarian governor up there, and if we had succeeded in repealing the income tax and the property tax, and the government's pretty well taxless by the time 1893 rolls around, and then we also succeed in the next couple of years of divesting the state of all this wealth and giving it to the people, we're going to be in the very uncomfortable position to make this whole thing reasonably politically palatable, of finding some way to fund at least a politically powerful degree of government, because they won't have any tax base left at all. And if we take away their resources, it'll be just what we really would like. But when you take into account that there's over 50% of the people up there going to get a government paycheck, either federal, state, or local government, you're going to have to deal with that problem somehow. And it's going to be a knotty problem to deal with. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Do you have much of a staff at all? And I assume there'd be libertarians if you did. And I'm just sort of wondering how your office or whatever handles itself, considering that it's basically the center of libertarianism, or maybe I'm mistaken.
Kind of like a beehive.
Sort of
No, we have Ken and I office together. It just worked out that way. And we each have a state-provided aide and secretary, which is traditional. When I first ran for office, there was a lot of thought that I shouldn't take my salary, that you shouldn't take any benefits from the state. I probably could have gotten away with doing that, although it would have been a substantial hardship. But no one else who's run for office could have afforded to even think about running if they weren't at least going to get their per diem and their salary. Because Juneau is 700 miles from Fairbanks. You literally have to move there and set up a second household and everything else. So it's just a totally impractical thing to do. So we each have the Secretary of the Aid, and my wife works full-time, and I have one other person that works full-time. I pay him with some private funding that's been made available to me. So we have Ken and I, and then Ken's had several people down for a week or 2 weeks at a time, and it looks like that's going to continue. People come from either Anchorage or Fairbanks, friends of his that want to come down and just volunteer 1, 2, 3 weeks of time working the process. So we've had that person around the office pretty regular. So it's really a full office. We don't really have room for all those people. Looks a lot like Libertarian headquarters they were doing there down in Washington. So we have 6, 7 people plus Ken and I, 9 people in the little office. And we get a lot of work done. I get to the office at 7 o'clock every morning, and Lydia and I are usually there until 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And we're doing something almost every weekend. If I don't have to go home and take care of my business, I'm out here doing something like this. Or last weekend we jumped on the ferry and there's a southeast ferry system that's got some nice ships that ply the waters. It's a beautiful country, and there's little staterooms on. So we jumped on a ferry and went to Sitka, and we got on the ferry I think Friday evening about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Got to Sitka the next morning about 8 o'clock, and spent the whole day in Sitka, and had a couple of libertarian meetings and did some libertarian work in Sitka, and then libertarian and looking toward the governor's race. And then we got back on the ferry and rode back, got back in to Juneau about 4 o'clock Sunday morning, and that was one of the nicest weekends we've had. But there's just a great deal of work going on. Yes.
2 questions. Back to the question that Mary Ellen asked about the campaign financing. Do you mind telling us how much you spent? How much did your campaign spend the 2 times that you ran as a Libertarian?
First campaign was about $11,000. The last campaign was about $21,000 or $22,000.
Okay, I kind of assumed that it might be a little less, because I know at least the assemblymen and the senators that run for state office from the Monroe County area, this last time it ranged from about 22,000 to about 75,000. 100, okay.
Yeah.
And so when she was asking the question about how do we raise money, even our county legislators spend as much as $20,000 to be elected to the county legislature.
I understand the problem.
We're really talking about a big fundraiser.
When you're out recruiting, try to find some rich people too.
The other question was, how specifically do you deal with your constituent requests? You get a letter from a lobby group that are your constituents asking for a service that you can't support. Do you preach? Do you just vote no? Do you ignore them?
We have 2 ways. Last year I handled that by putting out we have what we call a gimme letter, and it's just a letter. We tailor it to whatever the response is. But then we have a large 5 or 6 page position paper that explains to them why we can't support their proposition, whatever it happens to be. And basically, it basically says that this obviously is, well, I voted against. I did a really good little speech on the floor the other day. We have I did a dog race. It's a sled dog race that goes from Anchorage to Nome. It takes about 3 weeks. They do it in the middle of winter. It's really a grueling race. But anyway, the state had a bill to sponsor that to the tune of $50,000 of state money into this dog race. And, it's totally inappropriate, very popular thing to do, but a totally inappropriate use of state money. And I made the pitch on the floor that, if we didn't have all this money, we've been doing it for several years. I've been voting against it forever, but that and I just used the analogy. I said, if right in this room we had a tax system going, and we were trying to run a government with the 40 of us, and we were taking from all of you, and 30 of you decided you wanted to go ahead and use some of my money, the other 10 of us who didn't want to do the dog race, I just used a very basic example. That obviously isn't appropriate. And they could all see that wasn't appropriate, but only 8 of them voted with me. But then this gimme letter thing works really well, and we sent out a lot of those. And it's a good position paper on what the proper role of government ought to be, and what money what is appropriate for government to do, basically the court systems and the police and the penal system or whatever it is, and also go into what are really using forgot the term. Now, what is it when somebody robs you and you make them pay you back? Restitution. Thank you. That's been a long day. And that I think is something that we really got to get into. And I use an example of a senator whose house was torched, an arson case. They caught the people, the $100,000 house. They caught 3 people. These 3 people owed all they didn't owe society anything really, except maybe the cost of catching them. But they owed this guy whose house they burned down $100,000. What happened is, instead of him getting his $100,000 back from those monkeys, society spent another couple $100,000 catching them, trying them and incarcerating them. And so society was out there a couple $100,000, Bennett's out $200,000, and they're out walking around free. And the system ought to work substantially different than that. Anyway, we explain how things ought to work in this letter, and what is and is not appropriate for government to do, and we send it to them. And I think it's a good enough position paper that again, they don't agree with us, but they or maybe they do, but they'll want their little thing. Then there's no interest loan thing, this distribution. I use that quite often too. I say, I'd much rather than fund all these special little events, is to get the money back in the hands of the people, and then you do whatever you want to with it. Go get drunk, or build your fund your dog race, or build your little building, or whatever it is you want to do, but don't come to the state for it. Yes.
Dick, let's assume that you're elected governor and the state legislature eventually becomes libertarian. Now, you can solve all the state's problems, state governmental problems, from a libertarian viewpoint, but it seems that the bulk of the problems with government in this country involve the federal government. In the long run, would you foresee anything like secession in Alaska as being a solution to the federal government problem?
That's a solution. I don't know how to do that. I spent a lot of time, thinking about it, and I spent about 2 or 3 hours just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I guess, with the fellow who's the the ramrod of that secessionist movement. He ran for governor 6 years ago and got about 7% of the vote. The person who ran for governor on the independence ticket last time, I think, got less than 2% of the vote. I don't think the issues died down that much, but he just wanted to get a candidate. Unless we go into some pretty chaotic times, I think it's very difficult to find a way to actually secede from the Union. We did pass, and this is encouraging, however the motives weren't all that pure. We established a statehood commission, and it's presently functioning, which is to look at this year our relationship with the federal government, and to define our options, if there are any, as to what we might or might not do. And so that's being looked at, and that report's supposed to be back to the legislature by the beginning of next session. And they're supposed to look at, secession and Commonwealth status and anything else they can think of, and also deal with the Sagebrush Rebellion issue to the extent of what chance we have of actually prevailing there, either in the courts or through some sort of legislative action on the congressional level. So that action's taking place. But it's difficult for me. The South tried to secede once, and it didn't work out too well. And I don't know whether it'll work out any better now or not. So it's certainly an intriguing thought, but yeah.
What do you foresee as your personal goal as governor, say, in your dealings with the federal government in the long run?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. I have a bill in right now to tell the federal government we don't want any more of their money. We don't need it. And so if we would just simply quit taking the money, we'd lose, which amounts to about $250 million going to Alaska, $250–300 million. We could, get rid of an awful lot of the requirements on everything in our schools, in our hospitals, and on our roads. Every program has got all these strings attached to it. So by just not taking the money, we could free ourselves up a whole bunch. And we literally, we very easily could afford to do that. But there's a lot of people who don't want to do that. On one hand, the federal government's talking about coming up there and somehow taking over some of the money that Alaska has, because they think we have too much. And we could very easily, I think a good offense is the best defense. We could very easily say to them, here, we don't want this money, keep it, but leave us alone otherwise. So that's one thing. I think that there's a lot of grievances that not only Alaska but the western states have. That's kind of epitomized in the Sagebrush Rebellion. That if I was to become governor, I think the best shot I'd have at being effective in dealing with the federal government would be to rapidly become the leader of that Western coalition of states and deal with the federal government from the point of view of the strength of that coalition. And I think that would, since I would be a libertarian, I think that would elevate, as I said earlier, not only those issues, but libertarianism in the minds of everybody all across the country. And that's probably the best way of dealing with the federal government in a reasonable way. And there's a lot of people who wouldn't think that would be reasonable, but I think that's a possibility. Yes?
You made a statement, you've gotten a lot of good press coverage within Alaska itself. How do you see your press coverage in terms of the nation? I mean, I've seen what they do in the Rochester papers, which isn't a lot, but how do you see in terms of being recognized as a libertarian and the stands that you've made within the country itself?
As of now, I think it's been not totally non-existent, but almost non-existent. That wouldn't be true about a governor. Yeah.
What's your policy on voting in the Alaska state legislature when you have bills that have a little good and a little bad? How do you resolve that dilemma?
When in doubt, I vote no. I'm sure I made some votes that could be criticized by some purists, but by and large, I think it would hold up to pretty close scrutiny.
You use the preponderance of good and bad as your basic test?
No, well, I suppose, but weighted very heavily toward it's got to be pretty good, or I just as soon vote no, because it's going to pass without my vote. And I really think my goal as the first elected libertarian is to be as conscientious as possible of following a pattern that would make people understand where we're really coming from. And if I'm all over the ballpark in my votes, they're going to say just like everybody else. So, so I think by and large, my voting record would be pleasing to most libertarians. Yes.
Yeah, the state of Alaska has been in the forefront as far as investing its state employees' pension fund money in gold. Have you had any involvement in that, or what do you think of the idea?
I supported the idea. I had really mixed emotions about it. I'm very much in favor of gold. I think it's a prudent thing to do, particularly now. But so I just naturally said, yeah, the state ought to do that. But then the other part is, if it is a good investment, the last thing I want is the state to have more money, so they shouldn't do that. They did go ahead and vote. I think they've invested about 74,000 ounces so far, and they also hedged it. So they aren't losing money at this point. Some of the critics were criticizing the state for doing it, just as a purely economic thing, not counting who the state's involved and all that stuff. I think buying gold is a good idea. It's not a good idea for the state to do it because the state shouldn't have surplus money in the first place, but they do. And on pension funds, as a practical matter, they're going to probably be around for a while, and I think they ought to do the best they can for the individuals involved in those pension funds. So probably I would come down the side and I did vote for them to be able to do it. Yes.
In a general libertarian campaign, which you've gone through in bringing up most of the positions, which seems to me embraced the far left and the far right and everything down the middle, could you give us an idea which might get the more negative reactions and which get the... I know we're on a tax reduction binge now, and I suppose that's the easiest thing to bring up when you're trying to convert people. But what is the most sensitive, negative thing that might be, hey, stay clear of it if you can?
Well, I think that certainly varies with the person that you're talking to, but in general, I think the emotional issues of abortion, ERA, there's really no reason for a libertarian to get in trouble on abortion. I mean, I think you can make as good an argument for an absolutely anti-abortion stand as an absolutely pro-abortion stand and stick to very strict libertarian principles. That's an issue you can be all across the spectrum on and be absolutely pure libertarian-wise, it seems to me. It's one of the few you can do that with. And maybe there's somebody who disagrees with that, but I've reconciled my own mind dealing with that issue. But, if you're a libertarian, you come on a very strong pro-abortionist issue in a strong Catholic community, you've got problems. That's still a very emotional issue and a very current issue in Alaska. I think obviously the narcotic situation is not well understood by a lot of people, and I think that's an issue that can cause problems. Unfortunately, the draft's another issue. And unfortunately, at the time, I think if we could discuss the draft, say right now, nobody, well, it isn't so good now because Reagan's kind of getting the war fever whipped up again. But if we could sit down and discuss the draft situation with the general public in peacetime, you know, when people aren't really thinking of war, I think you could logically convince most people that the draft's a very amoral or immoral, improper thing to do in a free society. But you try to do it when there's a war fever being pitched by the media and the country's in danger, and you know it's impossible to do. And so I really think that that's an issue we ought to get on. So I think abortion, narcotics, way more than gambling or prostitution or any of the other sins. And the draft, I think, are the issues that you, and foreign policy, which kind of ties into the draft. Foreign policy, of course, we've had such a long-standing, bipartisan, secret foreign policy that nobody has enough information, and nobody in this room or me or anybody else, to know what the heck you're talking about, except that, you know, you don't want the draft and you don't want to go to war unless we're, you know, being personally invaded. But to really have any idea what's going on in our foreign policy is really a difficult thing to ferret out. But those are the issues that I think elicit the most plaudits. The economic issues, your typical, well, that's really not true either. I'm kind of got that statement went back to my old Republican and conservative days. I'll wipe that clean. There are just as many conservative socialists as there are liberal socialists. Most conservatives don't think of themselves as socialists, but you know the Chrysler bailout people and the Lockheed bailout people and all those folks are just as bad as socialists and probably worse than the poor people. And so you have a lot of that mentality running around, and when you get into the economic situation, most of the people in the other two parties and most of the people in bureaucracy really believe in the tax structure. I mean, they that's what they're feeding on, inflation and taxes. And it's we're an awful lot like a person that goes to the doctor for an annual checkup, and the doctor tells him that he's got this huge tumor, and it's a really serious situation. You have to have an operation right now. And the guy says, "Yeah, doc, I just came in here for a checkup. I don't believe that nonsense. I'm not hurting at all. You know, I'm going to go home." And so, since he's not hurting, I think as a society, that's much the way we are. In the back of our heads, most of the people out there know that things aren't quite right. They know there's going to be a day of reckoning one of these days, but they're not hurting bad enough yet to take the cure. And so they wait until they are. If we wait until we are hurting bad enough and go back to the doctor and say, "Hey, I'll have that operation," he's going to say, "Hey, it's too late." The only chance we have of curing this problem, is the problems we have in this country, is to make people wake up before it's too late. But they, understandably don't want to take the chance. They think they might die on the operating table. They don't want to go through the pain. They don't want to go through the expense. They don't want to go through the danger. So they say, maybe if we just ignore it, it'll go away. And it's not going to go away. So I refer to this big bureaucratic tumor we have that we've got to be willing to take the cure for. And that's what we're trying to point out to people, I think. Yes?
Since you're on the subject, how do you view the national political scene today with regard to what President Reagan is attempting to do? And do you think 4 years from now that people will be maybe ready to hear more about libertarianism?
I think 4 years from now people will be very ready to hear something about an alternative. Now, whether it's going to be libertarianism or not, it's up to us. I think that people have rejected Keynesian economics. They've rejected traditional liberalism. They've rejected that. I think the rejection of Carter and Kennedy and that whole raft is fairly complete. I think 4 years of Reagan, will have rejected that. There's no question. The way Reagan's going about it, he's going to fail. And we're going to be, unemployment's going to be worse, interest rates are going to be higher, taxes are going to be as bad, inflation's going to be worse, far worse, 4 years from now than it is right now. And people will be looking for an alternative. Whether we can be that alternative or not, people say we would have done better if it hadn't been for John Anderson, or we would have done better if it hadn't been, for the really bad situation between Carter and Reagan, or whatever excuse. But those alternatives are going to be around 4 years from now too. And we have our job of not running, in a vacuum, of thinking all we have is a Republican and Democrat situation. We deal with that, we'll be all right. You're going to have these other alternatives spring up. I think Anderson's probably going to run again. There'll be other people around if he doesn't. So we have a really major job between now and then of consolidating the gains we made and really working at it. And I think it's really important that everybody who is a libertarian, recognize and admit to the urgency of the times in which we find ourselves, and to make a real commitment to doing those things as necessary. I think we're actually, very strongly that we're really in a stage of war as far as our freedoms go, and that if we don't prevail, we're not going to live in a free society, and we're going to live in a very, very controlled society. We just take for granted the fact that we were fortunate enough to be born into a relatively free situation. Lots of that has gone in our lifetimes. Most people, the vast majority of people who live on the face of this earth, have lived in abject slavery. America was started, and it was a unique experience, a unique experiment that we're very rapidly losing. And we take those things for granted. And we don't necessarily. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm talking about the people in general. Just take those for granted, like flipping on a switch and there's electricity. Don't stop to think that there wasn't always electricity there. There wasn't always freedom there, and we know we're losing it very rapidly. And I really believe that we are the only way to maintain it is through the political process, because that's the way they take it away. That's the way they're hanging on to it. And if we can't compete in that arena, we won't win. The only way we're going to win is to be able to work harder and longer and persevere, stay to it, be there when they're not, and be as smart or smarter than they are, and just do the job. And it's vitally important, because if you don't have freedom, you don't have anything. I think another thing that libertarians very often fail to do is we always accentuate the freedom issue. Freedom is the issue. I used to sign on my letters, freedom is the issue. I changed that, because that really isn't the issue. The real issue is responsibility. Responsibility really is the issue. And I sign my letters now. It's a 2-line salutation. I say, freedom is the prize, responsibility is the price. And that, I think, is the whole message. And he who would be free has to be willing to pay the price. And if we don't pay the price, you can bet your bottom dollar, if you got one left. Has anybody in the room got a dollar? No, seriously. I got a dollar.
A dollar of what?
Huh?
A dollar of what? That's the important question.
A dollar of what?
Yes. A
Oh,
dollar of what? A dollar is a quantity,
Okay.
measure of quantity.
I buy your argument. You win. Okay, any more questions? Yes.
Did you say that more than half of the state employees or state employees or government employees?
Yes. More than half the people in the state of Alaska get a check from either federal, state, or local government.
Just out of curiosity, what issues do you think got you 48% vote?
Well, obviously, the other 48% voted for me. No, I think, an awful lot of people work for the government because that's the only game in town. It's the best job, the best retirement benefits, the best medical benefits. It's just the best job. I know lots and lots and lots of people that, in fact, my wife worked for the government until I married her, and I made her quit. But an awful lot of people, it's the only game in town. And in Juneau, 2 years ago, I started a Libertarian chapter in Juneau. And over half that Libertarian chapter works directly for either state or local government, or federal government. And they know the problems. That's the reason I think we have a really fertile field to recruit in out there. Those people who work and who are involved in the government understand its deficiencies far better than those of us who don't. And there's just an awful lot of them. They're there because they have to eat. And our challenge is to allow the private sector, free up the private sector, so they can start doing what it used to do, and at the same time, providing better and better opportunities over in the private sector, so that people will begin to go this way instead of this way. And it's a major job. I got this is going to really scare you all to death, but I'm going to tell you anyway. It scared me a little bit too. About 2 days before the election, I ran into the businessman agent for the Teamsters Union for the state, and he said, "Hey, Randolph, can you afford an endorsement from the Teamsters Union?" And I said, "Hell no." He said, "Well, you're going to get it anyway." And I did, and I found out later, how it happened. They took a poll of the people. The union movement up there, since the pipeline, the oil line was built, is kind of in disarray. They were very free with their money and their prerogatives when they had lots of people working up there on the pipeline, and they're in really bad shape right now. And an awful lot of people out of work, and the unemployment's high in Alaska. I'll finish this story and get the other one. But so what they did, they actually put out a ballot to their members, and then they just took the people who the members voted for and endorsed them. And I don't know this for sure, but I've heard from several sources that I was top vote getter with the Teamsters members. Now, I don't know why. I don't know what everybody's had, but anyway, I did get the Teamster endorsement. I forgot what the other story was. Unemployment. Nah, let's not worry about it. Must be another question.
I'm not sure just exactly how to phrase this. You've touched on it. Libertarians accept the idea of unions, so long as they're free and voluntary and all of that. But we have a case now, after many years, where I'm a farmer, and the people I hire are $5 an hour at the most. And we have up to $20 an hour in some of the factories. And we have unemployment. Now, until we tackle the first issue, it'll be pretty hard to get everybody employed again. But nobody wants to talk about that. I don't hear it anywhere. Is there something that keeps us from talking about it?
Well, I'm sorry.
We have to get shot?
What's the first issue?
The first issue is the discrepancy that has occurred in the labor field between a free labor and extorted price, as I call it. Until we solve that and free it up, I don't see how we're going to get people back to work, because they've been unemployed because of the high labor cost. And nobody talks about it.
It's a good point. I've never even seriously thought about that exactly that way, but you obviously got an excellent point.
I'm putting you on the spot. I remember that.
Yeah, I think we talk about it quite a lot. It's an issue that doesn't come up quite that way. The thing I tell the union people is that, in fact, we have a really good platform plank explaining what our belief is on union. It won't take time to explain it. It's just basic libertarian belief on unions. There's nothing wrong with unions. It's the coercion and force and the illegal activities they participate in that we're against. And I stand in front of union meetings and tell them just exactly that. You people have an absolute right to voluntarily associate, to voluntarily bargain, to do whatever you want to do, as long as it's a voluntary situation with both parties. But when they're stuck in a gun to the person's head, that's a problem.
You're facing this in the campaign.
Oh yeah. I made that same statement in front of union groups, just like this. Whatever they can freely negotiate with someone is fine. They have an absolute right to strike. They do whatever they want to do, but they can't, forcefully keep the guy, the employer, from doing what he wants to do, and he can't forcefully keep them doing what they want to do. It has to be a voluntary situation. I said the only thing that you people don't like about the libertarian approach to labor unions is that you can't be forceful and fraudulent.
Answer the question. You're still alive, and
yeah. However, in Alaska, I really, it's really not worth mentioning, although it's kind of important to me. I think if it becomes obvious to if other people in the labor movement and in the oil industry and in the many vested interests, you got to remember we're getting about $7 billion this year from the oil industry, and there's $7 billion floating around that's going a whole lot of different places. And if it becomes relatively acceptable that I have a chance of getting elected governor, I think I'm going to hire myself a couple bodyguards. I don't know if that's enough or not, but it's I really am. You said I'm still alive, and at this point, I don't think that the people who are really concerned about that, I think they're starting to think about it, but up until just now, they really haven't taken me very seriously as far as being in a position to do them any substantial damage. But once they do realize I might be in a position to do them some substantial damage, they might take a little harder look at the situation and make some very bad decisions.
Have you ever discussed the minimum wage question at an address to the union?
Sure.
With regard to the minimum wage actually putting people out of work?
Sure. They don't understand that, and I haven't spent enough time, with them. I haven't had but I have. I think the black community in Fairbanks, which is about 7 or 8% of the total population of Fairbanks, by the way, we have a good understanding. They understand it, I think, by and large. But the union people, that's a sacred cow that it's going to take some time to tear down. Well, listen, I've enjoyed this immensely. I certainly hope you have. And come to Alaska and see us, okay?
This concludes the program. Please fast forward the cassette to the end so that it will be ready to listen to again.